What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Minutes after this call, officers arrived at the home of Jose and Kitty Menendez to find them brutally shot to death. The attack was so violent that they were nearly unrecognizable. 7 years later, their own sons, Lyle and Eric Menendez, were convicted of the murders. Case closed, right? Not exactly, because decades later, this case still dominates headlines, documentaries, and even TikTok, with some arguing the brothers were victims of abuse rather than ruthless killers. But before we dive into that, let's look at the life they came from. Because the Menendez family wasn't just wealthy, they were ultra-rich. See, they lived a life most could only dream of, flying on private jets, driving expensive cars, and even rubbing shoulders with celebrities in the late 1980s. Their mansion wasn't just a luxurious home. It was a multi-million-dollar estate that could easily belong to a Hollywood A-lister or a sports legend like Evander Holyfield. Everything they had was built on the back of their father's relentless ambition. However, Jose Enrique Menendez wasn't born into wealth. He fled Cuba as a teenager during the Revolution, arriving in the United States at just 16 years old with nothing but determination. He worked tirelessly, earning a degree in accounting and later carving out a name for himself in the entertainment industry. He climbed the corporate ladder with precision, securing powerful roles at companies like RCA Records and eventually becoming a top executive at Live Entertainment, where he made millions. His wife, Kitty, was once a school teacher, but she left her career behind as Jose's success skyrocketed. With their growing fortune, the Menendezes gave their sons every possible privilege. Lyle and Eric attended elite private schools, wore designer clothes, and lived a life free from financial worries. But beneath the glamorous surface, cracks were forming in the perfect family image. Eric, the younger of the two, had an undeniable talent for tennis, ranking among the top young players in the country. His potential could have taken him to the professional level, competing against tennis legends like Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi. Lyle, the older brother, was accepted into Princeton University, but he struggled academically and was eventually suspended for plagiarism. By the summer of 1989, Lyle was 21 and Eric was 18. Their future was seemingly set. Their father's fortune, their connections, and their privileged upbringing meant they had access to a world of opportunity. The Menendez estate alone was worth well over $10 million, and had things played out differently, their father might have told them, "One day, kids, all of this will be yours." Instead, on the night of August 20th, the Menendez brothers walked into the family room where their father was watching television. Armed with shotguns, they unleashed a brutal attack, firing multiple rounds at their parents. The gunshots echoed through the mansion, shattering the illusion of a perfect family. When it was over, their father was riddled with bullets. His body slumped over in the chair where he had been watching television. Their mother, who had tried to escape, was shot so many times that part of her skull was blown away. The sheer violence of the attack stunned even the most seasoned investigators. But what happened next was just as shocking. The brothers didn't panic. They didn't flee in fear. Instead, they cleaned themselves up, changed into fresh clothes, and went to the movies. That night, while their parents' bodies lay lifeless in their blood-soaked home, Lyle and Eric sat in a theater, watching Batman. After that, they returned home, and that's when they called the cops and pretended to be shocked.
Beverly, emergency.
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man,
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102 response. 722 North Elmont.
What happened? Hey, stay there, man.
around. What happened? Who shot who?
I don't hear anything. I just came home.
You came home and found who shot?
Mom and Dad.
You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from him.
Okay. Hey, let me talk to Eric.
When the police arrived at the scene, they found Eric rolling around on the front lawn, curled up in the fetal position, howling in grief. His cries echoed through the night, an Oscar-worthy performance that would have fooled even the most seasoned detectives. But given what they went through throughout their childhood, the realistic cries of them just make sense. The brothers sobbed, clung to each other, and played the part of heartbroken sons to perfection. But behind the theatrics, something didn't sit right. Investigators pieced together the brutal execution. Jose Menendez had been sitting on the couch watching television, completely unaware of what was coming. The first shotgun blast struck the back of his head, killing him instantly. The force of the shot was so powerful that it nearly decapitated him. Kitty, hearing the deafening explosion of gunfire, rushed into the room. Her scream barely had time to leave her lips before the second shot rang out. The blast struck her in the leg, sending her sprawling to the floor. She attempted to crawl away, leaving behind a slick trail of blood on the polished hardwood, but there was nowhere to go. Her own sons towered over her, reloading their weapons. The next round of shots tore through her chest and arms as she writhed in agony. But it wasn't enough. The final, devastating shot was delivered point-blank to her face, obliterating her features and rendering her unrecognizable. It was a grotesque overkill, something more akin to a mob hit than a spontaneous crime of passion. And then, in an eerie and calculated move, the brothers fired additional shots into their parents' kneecaps. This detail was chilling. Why would sons do such a thing to their own parents? To detectives, this screamed of a professional-style execution, a deliberate attempt to stage the murder as a mafia hit. But here's where things got truly bizarre. The Menendez brothers were not immediate suspects. Despite being the only people with a clear financial motive, despite their suspicious behavior, and despite the glaring brutality of the crime, the police initially bought into their grieving act. They didn't even test them for gunshot residue, a basic procedure in homicide investigations. For a while, it seemed like they might just get away with it, but their greed would be their downfall. In the weeks following the murders, instead of retreating into mourning, Lyle and Eric embarked on a jaw-dropping spending spree.
Lyle returned to the Princeton area and began a kind of spending frenzy. His friends say they thought it was his way of dealing with his grief. Over several weeks, he bought clothes, a Rolex, a $62,000 Porsche. Rather than return to school, he bought a restaurant, saying his mother would have been pleased.
Meanwhile, Eric wasn't exactly keeping a low profile either. He hired a new top-tier tennis coach. On top of that, the brothers vacationed in exotic locations like London and the Caribbean, dined at five-star restaurants in Los Angeles, and drove around town in their deceased mother's Mercedes-Benz SL convertible. The money hemorrhaged out of their accounts at an alarming rate. In just 6 months, they had burned through over $700,000. They moved into high-end condos in Marina del Rey, flaunting their newfound freedom with reckless abandon. But while they were celebrating their new lives, the police were busy chasing a dead end. Investigators initially believed Jose Menendez's business dealings had made him a target. He was known for his ruthless and cutthroat style, making enemies in the entertainment world. The police considered the possibility of a mob hit. The staged kneecap shots made it look like an organized crime execution, but something didn't add up. If the mafia wanted Jose dead, why kill Kitty too? And why had nothing been stolen? As detectives struggled to find leads, Eric made a mistake that cracked the case wide open. Feeling guilty, overwhelmed, and unable to keep the secret buried, he confided in his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. He admitted everything, how they planned the murder, how they executed it, and how they covered it up. Dr. Oziel, bound by doctor-patient confidentiality, initially kept the confession secret, but here's where things took a wild turn. Oziel had a mistress, a woman named Judalon Smith. She knew about the confession, and in a moment of betrayal, she went to the police. Now, if you were the doctor's mistress at the time, what would you have done? According to her, she knew that Lyle and Eric were sexually abused. So if you knew that for a fact, would you still report it to the police? I want to hear your thoughts on this. At this point, Lyle and Eric were still oblivious. They truly believed they had pulled off the perfect crime. Lyle even went so far as to hire bodyguards for his shopping trips, parading around like a celebrity. Additionally, the two brothers had just established their own business called the Menendez Investment Enterprises. But law enforcement wasn't so easily fooled. With Judalon Smith's tip, they finally had the breakthrough they needed. The police were about to turn the tables on the Menendez brothers, and the downfall of Lyle and Eric was just beginning. They arrested Lyle first, since he was in California, and then Eric was taken into custody after he returned from playing in a tennis tournament in Israel. The case, however, was anything but simple. The legal battle was just beginning, and what followed was a courtroom drama filled with shocking twists and relentless maneuvering from both the prosecution and defense. The prosecution had what they believed to be a solid piece of evidence, the therapy session tapes. A judge ruled that these tapes could be used in court, but the brothers had hired a top-tier legal team, and they fought tooth and nail to suppress them for over a year. Every motion, every appeal, every legal loophole was explored. It was a fierce battle of legal expertise and strategy, stretching out the case and delaying the inevitable. First things first. Let's talk about the person who first knew who killed the Menendez parents, Dr. Jerome Oziel.
Recall Eric said it began with sort of a casual conversation between the two of them. They started discussing what would happen or how it would be if the person who was a dominating force and a negative force and a very controlling person in their life wasn't there anymore. And at that point, it evolved into a discussion about killing the parents, most particularly the father.
Menendez described for you, in particular, what it was that he was upset with his father about.
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
Well, basically that the father had just been completely dominating and controlling, was impossible to please, had perfectionistic standards, that he was controlling of a lot of different aspects of Eric and Lyle's life in a very extreme way.
They went up to the office where the infamous confession tape was recorded, a piece of evidence that would shake the entire case. But despite how damning the tape was, it didn't immediately lead to a guilty verdict. Instead, it played a major role in the Menendez brothers' defense. They claimed that their father had abused them for years, physically, emotionally, and sexually, and they saw no other way out. In the tape, the brothers not only admitted to the murders, but also revealed something shocking. They had found their mother's suicide note before the killings, which deeply affected their decision. Eric described his mother's pain, how she discovered their father's long-term affair and how it broke her. He recalled her struggling with alcohol and pills, telling him, "You don't understand how much stress I'm under. I take 13 pills a day and drink." The brothers believed that by killing her, they were actually doing her a favor, freeing her from misery. But there was also another terrifying thought. If she took her own life, they would be left alone with their father. And that was even worse. Eric later testified in court, revealing horrifying details about the abuse. He said that one night he finally told his older brother Lyle what had been happening. When asked why, Eric simply said, "I wanted it to stop."
Me telling.
You telling what?
Me telling Lyle that, You telling Lyle what? Was it you telling Lyle about something that was happening?
My dad.
Okay.
My dad.
Your Honor, can I ask a leading question?
If you don't ask my dad.
Wait 1 second, Mr. Menendez. Okay, let me ask.
No, he was in the process of answering, so there's no need to ask him.
Can you answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, it was you telling Lyle what?
My dad had been molesting me.
He described how their father forced him into oral sex and even used pins and tacks to hurt him during the assaults. He also shared that their father once threatened him with a knife, a jagged Rambo knife, to keep him silent. Lyle also took the stand and testified about the abuse he suffered between the ages of 6 and 8.
After sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this take place?
In my bedroom.
And how often would this happen?
Like 2 or 3 times a week.
And for how long did this happen?
Not too long. It began to change.
When did it begin to change?
I'm not sure exactly at what time, but almost close to when I was 7.
And how did it change?
Just became more involved.
What do you mean more involved?
We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
Did you want to do this?
To back up their claims, their defense team showed disturbing photographs as evidence, revealing the dark reality the brothers said they had endured. This is a proof sheet of the sequence of photographs from Eric's 6th birthday party. These photographs were found in an envelope with the handwriting of their mother, and among those photos, one that should have never existed, one of Lyle's nakedness saved by his own mother. Lyle would later testify that his father, Jose Menendez, took photographs of them in their most vulnerable moments, bathing, changing, just being kids. Lyle said that he wouldn't ask. He wouldn't say anything. He would just come in, snap the photo, and leave. Lyle described in court how, after sports practice, his father would massage him. Then, the touching began. It escalated, and Lyle was forced to touch back. After this, they would undress, and the nightmare played on repeat, 2 to 3 times a week in his bedroom or the bathroom. Then there were the object sessions: a toothbrush, a shaving brush, a tube of Vaseline. This was his father's twisted routine, and when Lyle finally found the courage to tell his mother, her response was, "Stop exaggerating. Your father loves you. He's punishing you because you do things wrong." But the trauma didn't stop with Lyle. The abused become the abuser. Lyle admitted that he did the same to Eric. He took Eric to the woods. He used the same toothbrush. And in the courtroom, with the weight of his own guilt crushing him, he could only say one thing: "I'm sorry." Years later, Eric finally confided in Lyle. He revealed that their father had been abusing him too. And when Lyle confronted Jose about it, the fear set in. However, the prosecution had its own version of the story. They painted the Menendez brothers as cold-blooded killers who wiped their father's computer, erasing the will to cover up their crime. A computer expert testified that the data was gone, irretrievable. But here's the twist. Lyle's own computer expert confirmed that he was hired not to recover the files, but to make sure they could never be recovered. So was it greed or was it fear?
Oh man, what's a win? You know, they're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison. On the good side, I will say that they're both such considerable human beings that they will find a way to be productive. And in fact, some of the jurors were saying that too. It was their expectation that they would both find a way to contribute to society even if they're in prison for the rest of their lives. And I truly believe that's true of them, where I could not say that that's true for most people in their situation.
Back in the late 1980s and early 1990s, conversations around male sexual abuse were almost non-existent. It wasn't just a taboo topic. It was something that society outright dismissed or refused to acknowledge. Many people found it hard to believe that men, especially young men from wealthy, privileged backgrounds, could be victims of such horrific abuse. The concept of male vulnerability was often met with skepticism, mockery, or outright denial. And when Lyle and Eric Menendez stood trial for the brutal murder of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, the nation was divided. The trial, broadcasted in real time across national television, turned into a media spectacle. While some people sympathized with the brothers and believed their accounts of long-term sexual and physical abuse at the hands of their father, others ridiculed them, especially for the way they broke down in tears on the stand. At one point, SNL even created a skit poking fun at the brothers during their trial. Their emotional testimonies were dissected, with critics accusing them of faking their distress to gain sympathy.
And it is your testimony that it was you who killed your parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, and not your brothers, Lyle and Eric Menendez, to whom you bear a striking resemblance.
Yes.
And that you forced your two innocent brothers, Lyle and Eric Menendez, to confess to the murder.
Yes.
Late-night talk shows made them the butt of jokes, and tabloid headlines painted them as greedy, spoiled rich kids who had killed out of a thirst for money and freedom. However, the trial took an unexpected turn when a forensic psychologist took the stand, presenting a crucial argument. The crime was not premeditated. According to the psychologist, Lyle and Eric's actions stemmed from years of abuse, fear, and trauma rather than cold, calculated planning. For a moment, it seemed like the judge was leaning in their favor, acknowledging that the psychological impact of prolonged abuse could have led to a spontaneous, desperate act of violence rather than an orchestrated murder for financial gain. But then, in a shocking twist, a key witness in the case, Lyle Menendez's best friend, Donovan Goodrow, seemingly contradicted himself on the stand. Goodrow had previously provided a recorded statement in which he admitted that Lyle confided in him about years of sexual abuse at the hands of their father. However, in court, Goodrow shockingly denied ever hearing such things from Lyle. This contradiction sent shockwaves through the courtroom and was even aired on Prime 9 News. The revelation forced the trial into a temporary halt as the judge and attorneys debated the significance of the tape, which directly challenged Goodrow's testimony. At the heart of the case was a question that divided the nation. Were Lyle and Eric Menendez calculating killers who brutally executed their parents for inheritance money, or were they lifelong victims who finally snapped after years of unspeakable torment?
Why did you kill your parents?
Because we were afraid.
Describe your relationship with your father.
Brutal. Prosecution was completely focused on the idea that Eric and Lyle Menendez were greedy rich kids that had killed their parents because they were in a hurry to inherit their money.
The jury struggled to reach a consensus. After weeks of deliberation, both juries, one for Lyle and one for Eric, ended up hopelessly deadlocked. On January 13, 1994, Eric's jury announced they were unable to reach a verdict, and just days later, Lyle's jury did the same. The mistrials left the nation in turmoil, with public opinion split. Some believed that the brothers' allegations of sexual abuse should have justified a lesser charge, such as manslaughter. Others argued that no amount of trauma could excuse such a brutal and premeditated act of murder. The prosecution, meanwhile, remained steadfast in its stance that the Menendez brothers were driven by greed rather than fear. When their second trial began in August 1995, the media frenzy had died down significantly. Judge Stanley Weisberg, who had presided over the first trial, made a critical decision. This time, no cameras were allowed in the courtroom. The lack of live television coverage meant the case no longer held the same level of public spectacle, and as a result, much of America lost interest in the proceedings. But behind closed doors, the defense faced major setbacks. Judge Weisberg significantly limited the testimony regarding the brothers' claims of sexual abuse, making it harder for the defense to argue that the killings were an act of desperation rather than cold-blooded murder. Additionally, unlike in the first trial, the jury was not given the option to convict the brothers of manslaughter instead of first-degree murder. Prosecutors dismissed the brothers' claims as nothing more than an abuse excuse and worked aggressively to dismantle their defense. Lyle, who had testified in the first trial, chose not to take the stand this time. On March 20, 1996, after just 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Lyle and Eric Menendez guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. 3 weeks later, after 3 more days of deliberations, the jury sentenced them both to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The once prominent Menendez brothers, who had grown up in Beverly Hills luxury, were now locked away for life, their fate sealed. But despite their convictions, their story was far from over. Years later, new evidence surfaced that suggested the Menendez brothers had been telling the truth all along. In May 2023, the defense team filed a habeas petition citing newly discovered evidence that could potentially overturn their convictions. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was a letter Eric Menendez had written to his cousin, Andy Cano, in December 1988, 8 months before the murders. In the letter, Eric detailed the ongoing sexual abuse he was enduring at the hands of his father. He expressed his fear, his inability to escape, and his hesitancy to tell anyone, even his own brother, because of his father's threats. Despite this evidence, the prosecution had previously dismissed Cano's testimony during the original trials, branding him a liar. However, the letter, written long before the murders, suggested that Eric had indeed been desperate for help, contradicting the prosecution's claim that the abuse allegations were fabricated after the fact to justify the killings. But the revelations didn't stop there. In 2023, Roy Rosello, a former member of the Latin boy band Menudo, came forward with shocking allegations. Rosello claimed that Jose Menendez, who was an RCA Records executive at the time, had sexually assaulted him when he was just 14 or 15 years old. According to Rosello, Menendez had lured him to his home, drugged him, and raped him. He further alleged that he had suffered multiple assaults by Menendez, once before and once after a performance at Radio City Music Hall. His sworn affidavit was submitted as part of the Menendez brothers' legal appeal, lending further credibility to their claims of abuse. If their appeal is successful, the Menendez brothers could be retried under different charges, possibly reducing their convictions to manslaughter. Given that the maximum penalty for voluntary manslaughter in California is 11 years per count, and considering they have already served more than 34 years behind bars, a retrial could mean their release. For decades, Lyle and Eric were kept in separate prisons, Lyle at Mule Creek State Prison and Eric at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility. They were only allowed to communicate through letters. But in 2018, after nearly 20 years apart, the California Department of Corrections granted their request to be housed together. The moment they were reunited was deeply emotional, with both brothers expressing relief and joy at finally being able to see each other again. Life behind bars has been drastically different for each brother. Eric married his longtime pen pal, Tammy Ruth Sackerman, and has spent years painting and donating his artwork to charity. He even gifted a portrait to comedian Kathy Griffin. Lyle, on the other hand, has dedicated his time to inmate advocacy, serving as president of the inmate government at Mule Creek and working with support groups for survivors of sexual abuse. His first marriage ended in divorce after his wife discovered he had been writing letters to other women. Despite spending more than 3 decades in prison, the Menendez case has recently seen a resurgence in public interest, particularly among younger generations on social media platforms like TikTok. Many of these young activists argue that the Menendez brothers were victims who acted out of fear rather than greed. Thousands of supporters have written letters to California officials demanding clemency. Yet, after all these years, one question remains: will Lyle and Eric Menendez ever walk free, or will they spend the rest of their lives behind bars? What do you think? Were they victims seeking justice, or were they cold-blooded killers? Let us know in the comments. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.